I never imagined that betrayal could arrive so quietly. Not with a scream, not with a confrontation, but like water seeping through cracks in the floorboards, insidious, unnoticed until it had completely soaked into the foundation. My husband, the man I loved for 12 years, had been unfaithful, and not just with anyone. My best friend Lena, my confidant since university, my maid of honor, the godmother of my son, had been weaving herself into his nights, into his whispered messages, into the invisible spaces of our life. I discovered it the way anyone might discover a lie, by accident. Though nothing in life is truly accidental, his phone vibrated on the marble counter, just outside my reach. The preview of a message appeared almost innocuous. Same hotel? Same time? I watched it there for a moment, slicing lemons for his morning drink. The knife felt heavier than it should, as if the weight of reality had anchored itself to my fingers. He walked in, smelling of cedarwood and faint perfume that was not mine. "Hey, babe," he said, kissing my cheek, as if his sins could be masked with routine gestures. I smiled back, like habit. 12 years had taught me to recognize patterns, even in deceit, and betrayal, true betrayal, was a pattern you learned too late to avoid. I wiped my hands, unlocked his phone using a code I'd memorized months ago. Not out of suspicion, but because I had long sensed a shift, a subtle erosion I could never quite put into words. The texts were endless, tender, poetic. This hurt more than vulgarity ever could. They sent songs, they sent poems, messages wrapped in affection that cut deeper than any scream ever could. I closed the phone, placed it gently back on the counter, and retreated upstairs. Every footstep was calculated, rehearsed almost, as if my body already knew the choreography of heartbreak. He hummed downstairs. Lena's laughter echoed in old memories, now contaminated, like sunlight spilling over something rotten. My reflection in the mirror didn't look broken. It looked calm. Too calm. I realized then, if I screamed, if I confronted them in a fit of rage, chaos would follow. But chaos would never be justice. Silence, I decided, would be my weapon. Forgiveness, as I would wear it, would be camouflage. My plan did not involve confrontation. It involved observation, patience, and the accumulation of power. 3 nights later, I invited Lena for dinner. She arrived smiling, wearing the same perfume, while he carried his guilt like a badly tailored suit. Over roasted lamb and carefully rehearsed laughter, I studied them. Every glance, every twitch, every slip of posture that betrayed nerves. I laughed at her jokes, poured him more wine, refilled her glass, all while collecting leverage invisible to them. Halfway through dessert, Lena asked, "You're glowing lately, Nora. What's your secret?" Her voice trembled at the edges. Guilt disguised as kindness. I smiled, letting the knife of my calmness sink. "Letting go of what doesn't serve me," I said, a half-truth, a distraction. She nodded, still unaware. He choked slightly on his drink. I watched 2 liars pretend I was oblivious, and I realized then that silence could cut sharper than any accusation. That night, as he slept beside me, I mapped my revenge. It wouldn't be about shouting, slamming doors, or catching them red-handed. Too pedestrian. My revenge would be silent, precise, psychological. I would take from them everything they valued: peace, control, comfort, and dismantle it quietly, invisibly. The next morning, I made breakfast. Soft omelet, fresh juice, an illusion of normalcy. He kissed my forehead, whispering, "I don't deserve you." He was right. But I smiled anyway. People rarely hear the threat in a whisper. For the next week, I pretended to forgive. I even arranged a double date with Lena and her husband, Andrew. Andrew, the quiet, kind, perpetually tired man, was an observer, one who suspected but avoided proof. That would work in my favor. Proof would come later. I started keeping a journal. Every lie, every secret, every deceit documented. Dates, photos, screenshots. All meticulously recorded. Not for me, but for them. One day, the journal would speak louder than any confrontation. I would hand it to them at precisely the right moment. Forgiveness, even when fake, changes you. It sharpens the way you see your enemies. They cease to be people and become puzzles, and puzzles can be solved. 3 months passed. I watched. I smiled. I collected. Until one night, I discovered something neither of them knew could destroy more than a marriage. He had been transferring money to Lena's startup under a fake investor name. Half of our savings. My name was absent entirely. I stared at the screen, heart steady, mind calculating. This wasn't heartbreak. This was war. I placed my wedding ring in a small glass bowl beside my bed. A reminder of betrayal, patience, and power. Every reflection, every movement in our apartment became fuel. I avoided the places of old happiness, the park, the cafe, every corner a knife inscribed with their names. Loneliness became a sharpened tool. Every night, the ring caught the streetlights, casting fractured shadows across my ceiling. Shadows that mirrored my plotting thoughts. Fragmented, erratic, beautiful in their danger. I had changed. The woman who cried herself to sleep after betrayal was gone. In her place stood someone patient, calculating, morally gray. The line between justice and obsession blurred, but it didn't matter. They had crossed it first. I had learned to wait, and wait I would. The days after my discovery slipped into a rhythm that outsiders would call normal, but I had become something else entirely. I was a predator in plain sight, cloaked in routine, blending into the suburban shadows while observing the two people who had betrayed me. I made it my business to notice everything. The tilt of Lena's head when she thought I wasn't looking, the way he paused before answering my texts, the subtle shifts in their tone when their lies crossed paths. Patterns emerged. Weaknesses revealed themselves like cracks in porcelain, and I learned to exploit them silently. My first move was subtle, so subtle that even I had to marvel at its beauty. I began by creating minor inconveniences in their lives. A misplaced document here, a subtly wrong address there. Nothing traceable, nothing overt. Just enough to introduce unease. Lena, who had always thrived on control, began to frown more often, muttering to herself in frustration. He, meanwhile, began double-checking everything he did. Anxiety, I realized, could be nurtured like a delicate vine, growing until it entwined itself around their hearts. I also started curating a second life, a quiet surveillance operation hidden behind smiles and routine. Every dinner party, every casual outing, I collected scraps of information. I learned about Lena's fragile ego, the subtle tensions in her own marriage, the secrets she shared with Andrew when she thought I was oblivious. Each piece of knowledge became a chess piece I could move. Knowledge, I discovered, was not just power, it was anticipation. One evening, I invited them both for brunch. Nothing extravagant, just pancakes and coffee, but my table was set like a stage. I laughed, poured syrup over their pancakes, complimented Lena on her hair. She smiled, unaware of the knife I had hidden beneath the tablecloth of my calm demeanor. I steered the conversation gently, asking about their work, their vacations, subtly noting every lie they told, every half-truth that betrayed their tension. I asked casual questions, smiled at their responses, and stored the inconsistencies in my mental vault. By this point, my husband had begun to show cracks. His confidence, once arrogant and untouchable, now wavered in the presence of my forgiveness. Forgiveness, I realized, is a weapon when wielded correctly. I did not scold, I did not cry, I did not scream. I existed as a mirror reflecting their guilt, letting it fester until it consumed them from within. It was during one of these brunches that I planted the seed of doubt in Lena's mind. Casually, almost accidentally, I mentioned a mutual acquaintance who happened to notice some unusual patterns in financial statements recently. My voice was light, airy, conversational, but the insinuation hit like a pebble dropped into a still pond. Lena's fork paused midair. Her eyes flicked to him, then to me, and a tremor of panic crossed her face. They didn't know yet that the pebble would become a landslide. Over the next few weeks, I increased the pressure. Small but consistent disturbances, emails that disappeared, bills that were mysteriously overdue, reminders I forgot to set. My husband grew increasingly paranoid. Lena became tense, fragile, snapping at anyone who looked at her the wrong way. The beauty of psychological revenge, I learned, is that it does not need force. It only requires patience. And patience, I had in abundance. One rainy evening, I invited Lena over under the pretense of needing help with a home project. She arrived carrying her usual saccharine smile, and I offered her tea. As we worked side by side, my hand brushed hers occasionally, an innocuous gesture. But I observed her reactions closely. Every shiver, every glance at my face, every distracted motion fed the map I had drawn of her fears and insecurities. She thought she was in control. In reality, she was navigating my labyrinth. At the same time, I began to manipulate their perceptions of each other. A whispered comment here, a casual observation there, and suddenly Lena began doubting him. He, in turn, started questioning her loyalty, her honesty, her very presence in his life. I watched the tension coil around them like smoke, thickening with every interaction. By the time they realized anything was amiss, the web was already set, and they were trapped in its invisible threads. One day, I decided to escalate. I sent him a carefully worded email under the guise of a financial advisor, highlighting discrepancies in accounts he thought he controlled. I made sure it was traceable to no one, but the panic it induced was visible immediately. He stormed into the house, face pale, shouting about mismanaged funds. I stood calmly in the kitchen, holding a cup of tea, and allowed him to vent. Every word, every accusation, every panic-driven command was catalogued. They were beginning to unravel, but I remained composed, my calm the anchor in the storm I had created. Meanwhile, Lena started to confide in me without realizing the trap she was walking into. She complained about my husband's neglect and his sudden obsession with details, unaware that her words were ammunition. I nodded sympathetically, smiled, and offered advice that subtly sowed more discord. Each suggestion, each innocuous comment, was a spark designed to ignite fires they could not control. By the time they caught on, they would be blinded by their own paranoia. As weeks turned into months, my plan grew more sophisticated. I created small scenarios designed to make them question their judgment. Photos that suggested meetings that never happened, messages sent from anonymous accounts hinting at betrayal, tiny financial anomalies I introduced myself. Every detail was painstakingly calculated. The thrill of control was intoxicating. The transformation from victim to orchestrator was complete, and I reveled in it. Through it all, I remained the picture of calm, serene, forgiving. I attended social gatherings with them, smiled at their jokes, poured wine, offered pastries. No one suspected a thing. And yet behind the scenes I was pulling strings, moving pawns, watching the panic blossom like a dark flower. The art of revenge is not in confrontation. It is in the slow, inexorable tightening of the noose. By the end of the second month, my plan had taken tangible shape. My husband's once careless confidence had eroded. Lena's facade of composure was cracking. They began to watch their every move, fearful of invisible eyes. I had them exactly where I wanted. And I realized then that the true beauty of revenge lies not in spectacle, but in anticipation. I could feel the climax approaching, the moment when all the threads I had meticulously woven would converge into a single point of collapse. And when that moment came, it would be not just shocking, it would be undeniable. They would feel the weight of every betrayal, every lie, every manipulation they had ever inflicted, multiplied 1,000-fold. But that moment was not yet. Patience was still my ally, and observation was still my weapon. I had learned that revenge is an art, and art requires time, precision, and subtlety. I had become a master of both. As I stood in the quiet of my bedroom that night, watching rain streak the window, I reflected on the transformation I had undergone. The woman who had discovered betrayal was gone. In her place was someone composed, calculating, morally flexible. Someone who could smile at the dinner table while orchestrating chaos behind closed doors. Someone who understood that true revenge is never loud. It is quiet, precise, and inevitable. And in that quiet, inevitable space, I waited. The beauty of my plan lay not in confrontation, but in invisibility. By now, months had passed, and the tension I had woven into their lives had reached a slow, simmering boil. I watched, with a clinical fascination, as they began to question every decision, every word, every fleeting glance. Lena's composure, once as polished as porcelain, now cracked at the edges. My husband's arrogance had dissolved into a jittery obsession with control. They were unraveling, yet neither realized the source of their anxiety. And therein lay my advantage: ignorance. It was during a late September evening, under the soft amber glow of the living room lamps, that I decided to test the limits of their unraveling. I invited both of them for casual drinks, a ruse designed to appear ordinary. Lena arrived in her usual perfectly coordinated attire, her smile a little tighter than normal. He trailed behind, glancing at his phone, tense, a faint scowl etched onto his face. I greeted them both warmly, offering wine and small talk, while mentally cataloging the micro-expressions flickering across their faces. I began subtly, making comments that implied mild indiscretions. "I heard someone mention a discrepancy at your office," I said casually, swirling my glass of wine. Lena froze mid-sip, her eyes darting to him, searching for reassurance or denial. "Oh?" she said, voice measured, but the tremor in it betrayed her calm exterior. He frowned, confused and defensive. The threads were tightening, and I could feel the excitement coursing quietly beneath my skin. Over the course of the evening, I escalated the tension in carefully orchestrated waves. A misplaced photo on the table, a casually mentioned rumor, an ambiguous comment about loyalty and trust. Each was a spark designed to ignite internal chaos. Lena began to second-guess herself. She questioned her own actions, her memory, and even her perception of reality. My husband, meanwhile, oscillated between anger and fear, increasingly aware that he might be missing some crucial detail. And all the while, I smiled, offered wine refills, and listened to their unraveling in absolute serenity. It was during this evening that I made the first move that would permanently alter the balance of power. I had prepared a series of anonymous messages, seemingly from mutual acquaintances, hinting at betrayals and hidden agendas. One landed in Lena's inbox just as she excused herself to the restroom. She returned pale, hands trembling slightly, whispering about a strange message she had received. My husband's curiosity piqued. He demanded to see the email. I let him, pretending interest but withholding nothing. The tension between them escalated to a boiling point, subtle cracks widening into chasms. The next week, I began targeting their vulnerabilities more directly. Lena had always prided herself on her image. Perfect, polished, flawless. I exploited this by subtly undermining her self-confidence. A comment here, a friendly observation there, suggesting that others were noticing inconsistencies in her behavior. She began to adjust constantly, second-guessing her choices, obsessed with appearances, while her inner sense of control disintegrated. I could see it in the way she straightened her hair more often, checked herself in every reflective surface, and spoke in careful rehearsed sentences. He, my husband, was not immune to my influence. His growing paranoia led him to micromanage his work and relationships, questioning colleagues and friends with a jittery intensity that bordered on obsession. I subtly fed him evidence of supposed betrayals, emails that disappeared, financial anomalies I had planted, whispered conversations overheard at social gatherings. The effect was profound. He began to trust no one, doubting even the people he had once relied upon. And still, he trusted me. That, of course, was my ultimate advantage. It was during a late-night encounter that I decided to accelerate the game. I sent Lena a cryptic text. Some secrets cannot stay buried forever. She called immediately, panic in her voice, accusing me of playing games. I feigned innocence, suggesting I was merely concerned for her well-being, and casually offered advice that intensified her anxiety. By now, the psychological tension was near unbearable. Every interaction, every glance, every word was loaded with suspicion, and I observed, meticulously documenting every reaction. Then came the confrontation I had orchestrated with invisible hands. I arranged for a small, seemingly coincidental meeting with a mutual acquaintance who had noticed irregularities regarding their finances and loyalty. The meeting was brief but incendiary. Lena left shaken, whispering frantic apologies over the phone to him, while he alternated between outrage and desperation, unable to fully process the manipulation. It was beautiful in its subtlety, their world unraveling, yet the source of the chaos remained obscured, invisible to their eyes. A talisman of hurt and a promise. Now it had become a metronome for the consequences I'd set in motion. You made choices, I said simply. So did I. My voice was steady. He searched my face for the old damage, pleading like a child asking forgiveness, but found only clarity. He realized, perhaps for the first time, that I was no longer the woman who forgave out of weakness. I had chosen another language, quiet, procedural, irreversible. The investigators' questions moved inward. Auditors requested account records, press called for transparency, legal offices filed inquiries. I had done the work of pointing them, but the world took over from there. Their panic amplified into mistakes, Lena wiring funds frantically to cover operational holes, my husband authorizing transfers without his usual caution, Andrew attempting to patch gaps in a consultancy that had never been built to survive fraud allegations. These errors made the case stronger, more damning. It was a terrible, elegant cascade. There were severing moments, violent, intimate, small. Lena stood in the doorway of our building one morning, drenched from the rain, eyes wild with accusation. You did this, she hissed, words jagged. She expected fury, perhaps even a scene. She wanted the confrontation to be scandalous, public, dramatic. I looked at her and felt only the residue of what we had once shared. Inside jokes, bridesmaid dresses, a godmother promise. And I felt nothing like pity. "No," I said quietly. "You did this." It was a distinction that mattered. She had built her own traps. Her recognition came like an animal snapping when the trap is sprung. For a second, her expression broke into something like remorse, then snapped back to defiance. Her voice betrayed her fear. She blamed everyone first. Partners, investors, enemies, anything that kept the responsibility from sticking. But the paperwork was impartial. It named dates, amounts, and signatures. The investigator had built a chain of custody that even the most brazen denials could not sever. The consequences spread outward in ways I had hoped to avoid. Collateral damage is a bitter ingredient of any war. A vendor lost income. An intern's internship evaporated. An elderly client of Lena's startup saw programming paused for months because donors withdrew. These were people I had not intended to hurt. They were people whose lives intersected with the lives I'd dismantled. Each time I learned of one more collateral consequence, a fresh, private regret washed through me. The thrill of control was dulled by the weight of human fallout. I had not expected empathy to revive in the midst of my calculation, but it did, like a stubborn weed. One night, as the dossier landed on Lena's desk and her phone buzzed with innumerable questions, I sat alone in our living room with the ring in my hand. I turned it slowly on my finger and realized that I had engineered their ruin, and in doing so had redrawn the map of who I was. I had become someone for whom the calculus of consequences no longer registered in absolutes. She had not just betrayed me, she had used our life as leverage. Still, the sight of Lena's office emptying, Andrew's voicemail full of panicked messages, and my husband's colleagues whispering in corridors felt like a victory shrouded in fog. Then the investigator's office contacted me directly. She wanted to speak in person. I met her at a neutral cafe, the kind of place with soft lighting and 2 bright pastries in the window. She was precise, professional, and not unkind. She laid out what she had found, asked me about anomalies she couldn't explain, and watched me with an expression that suggested she might have already suspected my involvement. I answered carefully, truth where it was safe, silence where it mattered. She didn't accuse me. She simply observed, catalogued, and left me with a look that felt like both warning and assessment. "You've done thorough work," she said quietly, not unkindly. "But the problem with thoroughness is that it leaves traces." There was no moralizing in her voice, only an almost clinical concern. Her gaze lingered on the ring I had worn on my finger for the meeting. In that moment, I felt small and enormous simultaneously. The investigator represented the world's machinery, the slow, ethical engine that could reconfigure narratives into consequences I had not fully foreseen. The next days were a blur of calls and legal consultations. Lena's PR imploded into crisis control. Andrew's consultancy attempted damage mitigation. My husband's partners sought legal counsel. The world took the pieces I had placed and moved them in ways I couldn't predict. I realized the truth that had been implicit from the beginning. You can orchestrate an event, but you cannot perfectly script its aftermath. People are messy variables, and vengeance is a force that multiplies when set loose. Weeks later, I found a letter slipped under my door with no return address. Inside was a photograph. The 3 of them, my husband, Lena, Andrew, laughing in a sunlit park months before the collapse. Handwritten across the bottom in an unsteady script. Some games last longer than you think. For a moment, the photograph felt like punctuation. Who had sent it? A silent observer? A sophisticated retaliation? I smiled faintly and felt the cold, hollow echo of satisfaction and apprehension intertwined. I kept the photograph on the kitchen counter for days, its presence a small, stubborn reminder that the world is not a stage with tidy acts. It is a tangle of actors and bystanders, and every choice sends ripples. Sometimes those ripples return to you with interests. In the end, the dust settled into a new pattern. Lena's company dissolved into messy bankruptcy and scandal. Andrew's consultancy closed. He disappeared from our social circles. My husband resigned from his position, trying to rebuild a life that now felt incomplete and fragile. I reclaimed what remained of our savings through legal action, bits and pieces of a past life that looked smaller in the light of aftermath. The revenge had been executed, precise and severe. The cost, however, remained printed on my skin like a tattoo I could not remove. I touched the ring in the bowl every night, and it no longer felt like a tool. It was a ledger of choices. It reminded me that some victories are coiled with loss, that the satisfaction of exposure does not erase the quiet ache of having become what you once despised. I had taken back agency, yes, but also invited a loneliness that was deliberate and cold. Sometimes I would see Lena across a room and feel nothing but an unreadable calm. Other times, when I passed Andrew in the street, I felt a prickle of pity that surprised me. My husband and I inhabited the same apartment, but our conversations were measured now, laced with everything left unsaid. Forgiveness, if it ever had a place between us again, would be complicated and cautious. One evening, months after the collapse, I met the investigator again by chance at a gallery opening. She looked at me with a small, knowing smile. "You understand consequences," she said, raising a glass as if to toast an unspoken truce. I nodded. I had learned that actions echo beyond their targets. I had learned that revenge reshapes both the world and the avenger. When I slid my finger into the warm metal of my ring that night, I realized how complex the currency of return had been. Reprisal had cost me pieces of myself I did not know I could lose. The ring had started as a symbol of love and had mutated into something else entirely, a tally, a reminder, and sometimes a warning. The photograph's message remained a small enigma. Some games last longer than you think. I kept it tucked in a drawer, not to forget, but to remember the way the world can turn in loops where hunter and hunted exchange roles until the chase becomes indistinguishable from the prey. In the quiet that followed, as the city resumed its indifferent hum, I understood the final, inescapable truth. Revenge changes more than those you target. It changes you. And if you are not careful, it will teach you how to live inside its shadow.